Nice to see everybody tonight. Really excited to be here and really excited to kind of keep talking about open data in the context in which, I think Anna mentioned, an expert. I would not consider myself an expert in open data. I would consider myself knowledgeable in the areas of public consultation. And that's really where open data became extremely interesting to me, is because working in public engagement and seeing opportunities to use open data in that world, it's, I feel like kind of sitting at the beginning of something that's just going to get really big. It's going to take a while, but it's super exciting. So that's sort of to put this in context. What I'm going to talk about today is how open data and the open data movement really needs to be focused on relationships and people and less on technology right now in order for it to get additional. So good, I can see. Okay, I'm going to come back to this photo a lot. This picture to me is sort of representative of the dog being the open data community. And there's this thing going on where the dog's like, oh, I have this thing, you're gonna love it, it's so good, this is gonna be amazing, you have no idea what I can do for you with this fish. The cat's kind of like, I'm not sure what's going on here. And I'd say this characterizes a bit of the space we're in right now, where people who understand open data, and like myself now that I understand it, we're so excited about it, but we're not really talking to all the cats yet. So this is sort of the theme of the discussion tonight. Before I dive in, I'm going to talk through what open data is. How many people have this app installed on their phone, Rocketman? That's it? I thought all the hands would go up. Install this app if you use transit, please. It's excellent. Just to give you an idea of how open data is used, just to make sure we're all starting in the same place here. There's a data set here that is provided by the TTC, which is providing information on where the TTC vehicles are by an agency of the government, and it's one of those ones that's updated all the time. This is a dynamic data set, okay? Makes sense? Yeah, I want big nods. Yeah, it's making sense, because you can say open data, and then 80% of the people are lost. So that's one very practical application. Another one here, dinesafeteo. This was developed to indicate, I don't know if you guys pay much attention to this on restaurants, but good, but, red, yellow, green, should I eat here, should I not? The information has passed as conditional or failed is available as a data set. Using that data set, an application was developed so that you could take a look at this, decide if you really wanted to eat where you're about to go. So again, the data that is open is the red, yellow, green stuff, okay? That's the data. To take this in a totally different direction, because those are both very personal use sort of items, right? You got this on your phone, you're using it, good. This is the National Health Service is the agency that can publish health data. And they had a data set that was published that indicated which doctors were prescribing generic versus branded drugs, okay? So this particular class is called statins. It's to prevent against heart disease. So this huge data set of who was doing what with these prescriptions. And it took about data and figure out that because some doctors were prescribing branded drugs, England as a whole was spending about £30 million per month more than it had to, which from a policy implication perspective is pretty amazing, because it's a huge opportunity for a cost saving, and the government itself had put that data out there for that story to be told. So this is not, pull up your phone and use it, but this is like a big policy national example of data. And finally, this is a map that was put together. It was started by a guy named David Topping, was previously at the Grid in Toronto West. I don't know if you guys read those or not, but this is a map of resident associations in Toronto. And so in this case, this data is user-generated. So the government is not publishing this data. It's actually people saying, hey, I live in Trinity Spadina, I have an organization, I'm gonna put it on this map so people can find me. This is also counts. You can get stuff from the private sector, you can get stuff from the government, you can get stuff that you make yourself. All of those things are in the world of open data. These maps are great. When we are doing public consultation, we need to find people. This is amazing that this is available. It's not just a static piece of paper, stapled on beside somebody's desk. We have to go, where are these people, right? So this is really a cool tool. very, very, very quickly, just because it might help to imagine. A lot of the time, this is the big, beautiful thing that we're talking about, which turns into other things. But the data is stored, and a lot of the time you might get it in a CSV, you might XML. There's lots of different formats. There's a lot of mapping formats, but essentially it has to be stored somewhere, looking like something like this. I got this from a blog called You Had One Job. Open data actually. One of the jobs that it has is it has to be open by default. So you don't have to ask for it, it is just available. That's key. And that's where a lot of this is interesting, because a lot of data, you can get it if you ask, you can get it in a PDF, you can get it, but it's not just there waiting for you. So open by default is one thing. And the second thing it has to be is machine readable. So it has to be something that a computer can do something with. The most hated format, probably, well, I'm not sure, but this one very is PDFs. It's like, okay, guys, you put it online. Now we have to do all this work to get it into another format, but you're happy to publish it? Fine, great, but could you just take it one step further and put it in a machine readable format? So that's what makes data open. I'm not going to get into this fine print here, but just to give you a little flavor of some of the issues that are sort of challenging in making a lot more open data available. No one wants to pay to clean up data. No one really wants to. There's challenges in workflow. It's like, well, here's half the data, and someone will throw it over here, and the other, then your colleague on the other side has the other half of it. So it's not all in one place right away. Ownership issues of data, privacy issues is a big one, especially in healthcare, so you have to suppress a lot of information, which is good. Agreement on standards, and it's the agreement part is the problem. There's a lot of different opinions on how standards should be, so that continues to be a long discussion. And the final one, which is Hi, Keith. No one's really asking for data, and this comes back to the problem. There's not so much demand because people don't even know that they can go and find Keith. It's going to be a theme. Go find Keith. Everyone go find Keith. So without people asking for it in the public, there's no reason for the government to say, oh, this costs money and there's 3 people asking for it. Fantastic. Let's prioritize that one. That's not going to happen, right? So the demand for this data has to increase for more of it to be made available. Going on there. Okay, so that was sort of the open data primer. I'm not going to get into that stuff. I know what slide was supposed to be up here. It's not showing up because I'm looking at Heather. The Open Knowledge Foundation and the Open Data Institute are 2 organizations that have been working on all this fine print stuff for a long time. Heather's here from Open Knowledge Foundation. There she is. If you have any questions or you want to learn more about this stuff, I would highly recommend looking up those 2 organizations because they have a lot of background information, resources, people, because we're not going to talk about that right now, so I hope that's not a big letdown. But I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the technical stuff. So to get back to this problem, so to speak, I'm going to sort of shift into my background and how open data and civic engagement come together. How many people here attend public meetings when they happen? Do you guys ever go? Not bad. Okay, so it's about, this is what I think. I think about 15% of the population sometimes attends public meetings. I really, really enjoy working in public consultation because it's a time when you can be engaged with stuff and it's not about elections. Like I really, really like to focus on the point that regardless of who gets elected, there's always opportunities to participate in your democracy, regardless. You can hate your counselor to hear, you can still go to all the meetings in your ward and make your issue known, and that's really important, and that's sort of the area that I work in, which is great. And to make those meetings meaningful, there's really 2 key pieces of process. And one of them is what we refer to as open doors and closed doors. And if you come into a public meeting and no one has made it clear as to what you can actually influence in that meeting, you're not in a good public meeting as a starting point. Like if you come into a meeting, it's just meltdown central and everybody's just mad, I don't want that thing, don't put that thing in my backyard. It's not going to be a constructive meeting. And so one of the really important things that we have to do from a process perspective is say, if you want to come to this meeting and participate, this is the thing that you can help give us advice on. And when you do that, you kind of direct people towards what issues they should be coming, to think about and pay attention to. And you also say, if you want to spend all your time melting down about this, that's fine, but you're losing your chance to influence stuff. So you have to be super clear about that. This second thing that is a key piece of process is we really, really like it when we have time to do a 3-part process. So for any public meeting, any public process, it's good to start. You have one meeting and you say, okay, everybody come. Let's talk about this park that we might want to make in our neighborhood, okay? Everybody comes, tell us all the stuff you want to do there. We're going to write it all down. Okay, so we're writing it down. You got it, good. We'll come back in a couple months and talk to you about what we might do with that. You have a second public meeting where you come back and you test ideas and you say, remember all that stuff you told us? We keep track of it, because if we don't keep track of it, we're not doing our job. And this is where I start to think about this. This is data. You guys told us all this stuff. Now we've come back, we heard all the things you said. This stuff, we did something about it. This stuff we didn't. Here's why, and here's what we made. So what do you think of this draft design for this park? Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like. Write it down again. Come back the third time and say, here's the park. We have given you 2 other chances to talk about what you wanted to see here, and we've kept track of it all. Because nothing's worse than going to meetings and you feel like you're talking and no one's writing it down and no one's connecting this data that you're providing to outcomes, right? So those are really two critical parts to having a good process. And these tie to a couple of projects. This is sad Keanu. So the point is that with good public process, you're generally using data. Yes, it's not called open data, but it's there, right? So this data is already part of good public process. So there's a couple of examples I just want to touch on quickly. Yonge and Eglinton, anybody get to Yonge and Eglinton frequently? Yes? Bit of an eyesore, right? So we just finished up a project where there was public realm improvements, questions like how can we make Yonge and Eglinton a place you'd want to get out and walk around and be in. And so one of the things we did with this project was we had people indicate where they would want to have benches on that intersection. And we actually took the information that people provided, mapped it, I think we had about 70 data points, and provided that to the landscape architects, who then used that information for the conceptual design, right? So this is what you can think about as little data. But using that data and being able to map it is really cool. And one of the things that was important in this process is people aren't just like, oh, I can do it on my phone, great, let me get out to Yonge and Eglinton and do this. We had to act as stewards for this. So people would call us and say, we really need to sit down under that thing. You're like, okay, hang on, just give me a second, you write it down. And then you go, they wouldn't go to an application and put it on a map, but we could. And so this is where just starting to think about how can everybody in this room start to make open data and data sort of happen. Sometimes you got to be the person who's inputting it. Some of the less glamorous pieces of this are the things that are going to make it happen more often. So that's something that we did to sort of map that stuff. Let me see. These ones are showing up. Okay, well, I had 2 other pictures here, so I'll just tell you what they were. One of them is a picture from a project we worked on in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and a lot of housing was destroyed. And after the housing was destroyed, there was an opportunity to work with the developers to come to the community and say, okay, guys, we need to rebuild this housing, how should it look? And there were a lot of different designs that were put up on walls, and at the public meetings, it was very simple, data collection, red dots, green dots, you go and you say which ones you like and say which ones you don't. And that's another example of it's low tech, but we're definitely using data to inform the final outcome. Another example, we're doing some work, we continue to work in Pittsburgh with the library system there. And the library system is under funding pressure, as shrinking cities tend to be. And so we were there to consult with the community on what to do, because the immediate sort of knee-jerk reaction is, well, let's close a couple branches. If you do that, you save a lot of money. And so that suggestion went over absolutely. Nobody wants their library branch to close. So we sort of set up a framework, and we had people talk about the different areas where they could change things. Do you want to change hours? Do you want to change services? Do you want to change programming? And we sort of had people, with their arrows up and down as to whether, which things would satisfy what they wanted to do. The solution ended up being, you just shorten your hours rather than close branches, and people were okay with that. But that's what happened in that case. So let's see. So the point is that people use data in public process right now, and if they knew there was more of it available, they would be extremely excited because they're pretty organized people, generally, people who are active in communities in any sort of political scene would love to know this, but this is one of the biggest problems right now, we're having a communications problem. Because I've told people, I know for sure, I've talked to cycling advocates recently and said, oh, so if you guys are working on safer streets, would it help to have all the accident information? Well, yes, that would be extremely helpful. Do you know that you should probably go find out if that's a data set you can access? Yes, that's probably a good idea. And if it doesn't exist, you can advocate to get it, right? Oh, yeah, actually, we could do that too. So there's a lot of opportunities to do these things in any sort of a situation. So this is a challenge. So back to this scenario here. This is good that I can remember all of this. So I had a picture of people who, were all at a public meeting. And I think this was my moment last year where I thought, this is so exciting because all these people already go to public meetings. We don't have to invent a big population to get them excited about open data because they're already excited about being active in their communities. We just need to introduce them to open data, which is a lot easier to do. The second thing is that those stakeholders organize by content. So you're going to go to a public meeting. Every time we run a process, we map and we say, okay, who are the transit people? Who are the safety people? Who are the schools people? And you go through it. And because people organize by content, guess what, that aligns very well with data sets, right? Oh, okay, so your transit people, you probably want this, this, this. Oh, your safety people, let's go see if the police have this, this, this. Bad example, but, right? And you can go through all of that and figure out, this is maybe because it's asleep, would that be funny? You can go to any community of people and say, hey, we need to have this. If you guys need data, there's stuff for you, right? So there's really no shortage of opportunities to connect people with data. So let's see where we get to pick up here. Good, okay. Let's see, this. There's one other piece that's critical, we'll see. Okay, so does anybody recognize this? Yes? Is anybody at the meeting? This was a proposed design for the Mirvish condominiums on King Street. I don't know if you heard about that or not, but that was this design. And I went to this public meeting, and it was actually not as much of a meltdown as I thought. We weren't running a process. Adam Vaughn set up a meeting. And so when people start to freak out about this, some of the examples are, there's not going to be any sunlight, there's no transit already, the sewers aren't going to work, how are we going to know this is, like all of this stuff, and it's all pretty valid questions. And so thinking about the fact that those meetings exist and that data exists, this is where you think, wouldn't it be great if the city were able to come to this meeting and say, hey, this is the impact of the sun, right? Look, we know what these are going to look like, so let's go figure out by data what a shadow study would look like. And then we can bring it, and maybe you like it, and maybe you won't, but at least we won't just be melting down about it. Same thing with transit capacity, infrastructure, anything that you can imagine. If you can bring more data forward when you're having meetings like this, people can sort of calm down a bit, because some of that data, it might be scary. And then that helps build awareness. I think all the time, infrastructure, no one wants to talk about our basement flooding and sort of sewer system stuff, but it's really important that we knew that we all actually know more about that stuff. So it'd be good to present it when we have this discussion and we can think about all this stuff. So that's a pretty cool opportunity to use data in a different way. This is a picture from, this guy's name over here is Jean-Noël Landry, and he's with Montreal Ouvert, to do my little French accent here, that's how he would say it. He came to Toronto end of last year and was telling us some stories about things they've done in Montreal. And this one's really cool because they did a project where they had people who had accessibility challenges match up with people in the technology community, and they went out onto the streets and they said, okay, let's go to this intersection and let's create information about how accessible or inaccessible all of these places are. So they created an app, not an app, they created a map really, that provided a whole bunch of information that would help anybody who might be having these issues. If they're gonna go out, they can know, because this is kind of testing the French here, but they're talking about general comments. Is there stairs? Is there a ramp? How many doors are there? And you don't need to be technical to go do that on a weekend, right? Like if this was organized in Toronto, you could easily say, let's go canvas this stuff. And never mind the developer side of it, let's just go out as a community and say, hey, we need to start writing this stuff down so we can improve it. So these are really cool stories and opportunities, like for anybody, if you have a cause, there's always something you could do to start making applications that can, or maps or anything else that can make life better for people, which is cool. That's a nice story from Montreal. So these things together, having open data and using it in public process and using it to make better decisions, really, it improves the level of democracy, the quality of the democracy, I think, and also quality of life for people in cities in some of these cases, like this accessibility example. So this is the getting to Keith part. So to increase the supply and use of open data, we need to increase the demand for it. And that's just about people knocking on the city's door or the province's door or the federal government's door and saying, this thing, I want this thing. See, that's Keith. So if anybody has open data that they want, everybody go chase Keith down. Not that he can necessarily make it happen, but we need to start moving the conversation so that people can go and get comfortable with their government contacts and say, hey, I want this thing. Hey, I want this thing. Because in discussions with the city, as mentioned, like we did a project with talking about quality of life for people in condos in Toronto. It's so powerful when 40 resident groups would go to the city and say, we want this thing, because that's thousands of people asking for open data. Right now, no one's doing that. It's, it's an individual saying, hey, this would be really cool, can we have this thing? So this is where, to get volume to the city to ask for stuff, and the province and the federal government, is extremely important. This is the way that open data is going to start being a priority. Because when you have to answer to thousands of constituents as to why you're not doing it, it's ramping up in its political relevance. Which right now, it's not there. It's not an issue that's on a lot of politicians' radar. So as far as what to do from here and to make that happen, there's a few opportunities, and I think maybe 4 very straightforward steps to take. One of them is to build relationships with people who are already organized. Like, this should not be inventing something new when there's all these people who go to meetings and do stuff together in a community. Out of the Open Data Day event that we had, when was it now? A month ago? One of the projects that came out of that was a project to work with the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, because there's 2 issues that we hear about constantly in the news. One of them is there's a massive repair backlog. The other one is there's multiple year waiting lists for housing. Right? So you hear this all the time, and then it's kind of like, okay, that's all I hear. I don't know much more than that. So I thought, what can we do about this? The people who are going to be able to make the most sense of this issue and to tell you what a priority is to work on are the people who are already organized around the TCHC, right? So step 1, go talk to people. If you want to help with something, go talk to the people who are already working on it. This is what I consider anyone in this room, because if you even consider yourself somewhat technical, you can be massively helpful to communities. You don't have to be a developer to be able to tell someone, okay, well, this is how this stuff works. Like, here's the spreadsheet. If you need to do something with it, there's a couple of applications you could use. You want to make an infographic, you could do this, you could do that. Anybody can help somebody who's interested in using open data. Anybody in this room, I'm sure, could be helpful to someone who had no idea what was going on. So I think we need to sort of be ambassadors of this if we want to move it along. The ideal end state is that the community takes over any sort of development project, whatever it may be, because product management should come from someone who knows the problem. Right? Like, there's nothing kind of worse than when you see people trying to solve someone else's problem, and you sit there and you think, Toronto Community Housing example, perfect one. Let's have 8 people in a room, none of whom live in Toronto Community Housing, develop a solution. It's like the worst possible way to work, right? So you have to make sure that the community is engaged, and the best end result is that the community is doing it all themselves. This is really just a matter of building a bridge to a community and saying, hey guys, you can do stuff. I think the final domino in that piece, just taking the housing case forward, is that once you're using data more frequently, either in tools for the community or in public consultation, it starts to move out, whether it's through editorials, in journalism. Like, how do you get to the 85%, so to speak, who won't come to meetings? right? So this is sort of that end effect of that data being out there. This I've been living since the last month. It's really easy to say, build relationships, connect to the community, just go and tell them, because I can tell you from talking, for example, to a cycling group, these people have it to here with stuff to do. So when you think you're gonna bomb into their lives and be like, you guys, open data, it's gonna be amazing, come. They're like, I have to write grants and do funding things, and like, this sounds confusing, I don't wanna do it. It's not an email or a phone call. It's like every couple days, how you doing? Here's my email thread, I'm doing something for you, okay? I'm gonna continue to be here with you and show you value for you getting involved in this community of open data people. Because this is not just saying, hey, come, yeah, just come. Like, this takes work, and it is a slow dance and a long sort of process to get people who don't know about open data to stick at the table, not just to come to one event or a hackathon or whatever. I mean, we're talking constantly being in contact with them so that something good comes of it. And I think what that was. So I think, oh, I know, the last picture was just a heart and a mind. And basically, the point is that there's a lot of technical stuff going on in this scene, but it's really about people now, because momentum's gonna happen through people who aren't hardcore at the table talking about this all the time. Momentum's gonna come from people who can casually engage in open data. So that's really the challenge right now, is to make this accessible to people. And I think if we can all do that, and I consider everybody in this room quasi-responsible to make that happen, if you've got something you're interested in, then that's really what we should be focusing on. And there's tons of opportunity for it, which is really exciting. So that's the stuff I wanted to tell you. I wanted to tell you two quick things, because I'm in a room full of people who work in technology. I volunteer for this organization. I don't know if anyone's heard of it or not, but if you could spare a day a year to go to a student classroom and talk to them about your career in technology, they'd be really happy to know you. So if you can get in touch with this group if you'd like to, it's a really, really cool program. You can just go in, it makes a big difference, and kids can talk to you. And their first question is, how much money do you make? Just so you know, they're getting smart. And the second thing is, beyond this stuff, there's three of us who are kind of getting the Open Data Toronto thing back up and running. So I would really welcome anybody in this room who's interested in any topic or anything to do with a project. Please be in touch with me, because I'd love to talk to you about it. Otherwise, thank you very much. Questions? Yeah. That was off the hook. If anyone has a question, no? Yeah, it's off. That one.
Hi, my name is Sonia, and this is the first time I'm Girls Geek, but it's very interesting talk. One of the questions that was like running in my mind all the time was, how do you increase the trust on the reliability of the data? Because you can provide the data, but people look at it like, I don't think it's 50% of the people that, or the sewers are safe. I think they are not getting me the right data.
Yeah, this is a good question. This comes up a lot. I can think right now we're doing a project, Dufferin Street. Anybody been by Yorkdale Mall? Do you guys know this place? It's like one of the most congested knots of traffic in Canada. And so we're doing a little avenue study on a little piece of that road. And of course, everybody's first thing is, how can you be putting any condos or anything here when we can't move on this street? So show me your transportation data. And so they'll show transportation data, and then you get a transportation consultant comes up and goes, now we're going to explain how we did this in the modeling of the transportation data. And it is absolutely inaccessible. It's absolutely, absolutely super complicated. And I think that still here? There's things that can't be so simple. But I think what you can show people is we're willing to provide it to you. And if you have challenges with the way that this data is created, you give them a person to talk to about it. So in this case, when there's a transportation consultant and you publish it all, because we get people, they email us and they say, what are the factors you're using? No. And it's like, good. Let me forward that to this team. And they'll have to answer you. So I think the primary thing is to show it. Make sure that you show, even when it's not accessible, you say, I know this is hard, but here's this stuff. And if you have questions, here's the person. And you make sure that you're going to spend time. Because those, sometimes you can get into 8 hours of back and forth. But if that person is satisfied at the end of it, you've won someone over, right? And I think that's like, I think you also have to preempt things and say, it's not that simple. If this was that simple, we wouldn't have to be spending 4, 6, 8 weeks studying it. But I think make it available and put a human face to whatever you make available so that questions can be asked. Those are 2 ways. Yeah. I can probably hear you if you want. There you go. Cool.
Sort of building off of that question, I was wondering if you could talk about data literacy and sort of the importance of that, or if you think it's important.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think data literacy, so is it important? Absolutely, super important. Is it hard to find a time when people want to pay attention to it and increase their literacy? I think that's probably the biggest challenge. I think in any context, you need a reason to become data literate, right? So I think this kind of falls back on the community to say, start to put something up and say, okay, we're going to talk about data formats in XML, and then it's like, oh God, I don't want to do that. So that's the wrong way to go about it. The right way to go about it, I think, is you find the issue. So this to me was a cycling example where you say, okay, and I actually sat down with the cycling guy, and he said, yeah, we need coordinate counts, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. What does that mean? And that's traffic counts. So there's kind of a dual literacy that needs to happen, because sometimes you can't really help unless you know the jargon of the community that's interested. But I think you have to make it content specific. Like, I really don't think that there's a lot of enthusiasm to have some big across-the-board generic literacy program. I really think that you have to say, okay, well, what do you care about? Okay, let me show you a spreadsheet that will matter to you. And then all of those columns get interesting. Like, I know I've seen a column in that TCHC, Toronto Community Housing Corporation information set that was, I mean, it just was of interest because they had this is a data set that's available through the city. They had the police division as a column in the data set. And this is one of those like, right? What's this doing here? And it became relevant because when you start to think about the discussions that are going on between the TCHC, Toronto Police Services, right? So then that column F, it's not column F, I'm just saying it, but that thing became relevant to me. So I don't know, I think that's kind of the way it can be achieved, but not with just open data 101 stuff. I think that's kind of, yeah, you wanna go?
I was just curious, and I don't know the state of it, but I know, for example, a few years ago that the government mandated that all future government websites be accessible and be made accessible friendly. Since a lot of the data you're talking about does require an IT investment, while it's hard to grab capital at any given moment to do that because the government isn't so technically capable, or at least it's not evenly distributed, what is the state of passing legislation or extending legislation like the Freedom of Information Act to include accessibility into future IT investment?
I would not be able to answer that question as to the current so the question is, let me make sure I'm getting you right, that what would it take to pass accessibility requirements within next generation legislation, so to speak?
As they invest in new systems.
Right. Right, and this, I'm just gonna kind of not avoid the question, kind of just move this way with it. This has been coming up as a topic in the community in terms of resolve the workflow, like rather than try to make all the data from now this way accessible, put in systems that when you use them, they create open data by default, right? So I think that's like that, and it might address that. Like I think that's coming, but it's one of those ones that I read articles and I see people are talking about it, but I don't really know that it's moved its way really up to the front of the queue in terms of, those requirements when they're, because I know when I saw the Open Ontario consultation happening, that's the kind of thing I'm like, well, okay, if the Premier's talking about it, this means this stuff's going to start to, have implications down the line. But I think that's where it would fit, is in those, and it has to do with like procurement is a big piece, right? Because it's often, when I think about the work that we do, there's transportation consultants, for example. They work in their own systems. We pay their bills, right, as citizens to do work in the public sector, but they decide how they do their work and how the files are going to be handed to us, right? So there's like a few different layers of that, but So I don't really know when it's going to happen. But I think the discussion, if you look at the procurement discussions and workflow discussions, that's where it kind of fits into. Yeah.
Hi, so once access to data is gathered or granted, how do you bridge the divide between having the data and making it consumable, or dare I say even beautiful? Infographics, things of that sort, multimedia journalists, for instance.
Right. How do you do it? There's a few ways. I think there's some applications that'll let you go on and work, create an infographic in a day. I've got a very sort of unsure emotional relationship with infographics, because there's a lot of the ones where I look at them and I'm no further ahead. I stare, I'm like, this is not helping me at all, but I don't know if that's my brain. So some of those are available online like this. But I think from a process perspective and making it useful and everything else, I think hackathons it's a really cool starting point, where there's events where, we were talking about people who are data people and people who aren't so much coming together. When they do, and when they do that, and hackathon events tend to be like really good times when that happens, you can start to see an outcome that somebody's asking for. And I think you hear it all the time. If you publish data, someone else is going to come up with the best thing to do with it, right? So sometimes you don't know. I think there's some serendipity involved. If you just put stuff out there, you'll never know who's going to come across it and do something with it. But I think there's a whole spectrum. I think there's tools that can help you do stuff with it right away if you go online and do that. But there's also processes where you get people together and they say, hey, what would it be? Because the housing one, to me, is a perfect example. It's not about building some massive application in some cases. It's like, if this is a backlog, what does this consist of? And it might just be a graphic, or it might just be a chart that explains things, right? And when you get together with people, you start to understand what's the most useful thing we could make, and then that happens. But I think the critical part is people who know how to manipulate data, talking to people who don't, because I think that's where the best opportunities are sitting.
David, let me invite you to the next Data for Good meetup.
There you go.
Look on meetup.com, Data for Good. 60 of us in a room cramming on data all day long, 12 hours.
Good one. Right on.
More questions, guys?
I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to articulate this best. You said that you spent a fair amount of time in public consultations and public meetings, and I'm just wondering if you have any general strategies for ways to help people that maybe aren't so data literate or so data savvy, kind of articulate their needs, and to help them kind of understand what data sets they're looking for, or how to sort of translate an abstract need or desire into like what you actually need to get in terms of data or find or search for.
Yeah, that's the first project that we started to work on with the Canadian Open Data Institute, because we thought if you built a framework that just says, put the organization here, put what they do here, and start to talk about what fields they need to fill in, I think if you can create sort of a document that if somebody wants data, that if you need the person who knows about it and the person who doesn't to sit with this thing, and together using a framework like that, they could explain and teach and say, okay, well, this data that you're looking for, I think that's provincial. So who would you talk to? This person here. And what is the thing you're actually after? Here, let's go look at the formats that they have. This is probably the format you're asking for. Although, ask them, ask them how to make it available. I think having like a generic document like that is helpful, so we're working on one, because I found that, but again, this is really reflective of the relationship part. Like, I think it's hard to get away from the person sitting with you, making it make sense, because you can't publish, it's like your head explodes when you think about how many different versions of it you'd have to make sense to somebody who's a transit person or a housing person or this, right? Like there's an infinite number of use cases, so to speak. What you need to do is set out what are the pieces you need to ask about, which are, who do you have to ask? What are you asking them for? Is it, I think about, is it static or dynamic? Like, are you getting something that's published once a year, or are you getting something that's published constantly, like the transit information? Okay, so I think that it's having a thing, having a document, and having a person are the critical parts. I also think that from a public consultation perspective, what we have to do when we run any kind of a meeting is provide, we call them focus questions. It's like, here's the questions that help you know, what's on the table to discuss. And I think you can, it's the same thing. It's like, how do you narrow someone down to say, okay, what's your concern? What are the questions you need to ask to get your concern addressed with data? Right? But again, I still think it's like we need to create hundreds of thousands of us to go out and find people who need help, because I really think it's back to that tech support thing. We need to help people understand it from a personal perspective.
We have time for one more question, if there is one. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you.
We'll take a